All right, chapter 22 of George Washington Sax. We are really, really close to the end of the book. If only we could figure out the magic of the boat, Tony whispered as they sat floating in the darkness. Adam Hibbs had tried to tell me about it before he died, Hugh spoke up. He said something about the mind. Maybe what he was telling me was that our thoughts have something to do with the power of the boat. You know, we were all talking and thinking about the Revolutionary War when we first saw the boat, Tony added. That's right, we were, Matt agreed. And Katie was talking about home when she got back in the boat to leave. We may never figure it all out, but I think we've unraveled an important thread, Hugh remarked, trying to sound like his hero, Sherlock Holmes. All I know is it sure feels good to be warm again. Matt sighed, dipping his hand into the warm lake water. I'd almost swear we're back on Levee Lake. This may not be the right lake, but is it the right year? This may be the right lake, but is it the right year? Tony wondered as he squinted in the darkness. Matt's hand skimmed along the water's surface when suddenly he felt something float over his fingers. He jerked his hand away from it, thinking that it might be a fish. When he was finally able to make it out of the misty darkness, he realized what was floating in the water was a piece of paper. Quickly, he bent over the side of the boat and scooped it up onto the floor of the boat. What is it, Matt? Hooter asked, leaning over to see what it was. All the other members of the club did the same. I don't know, Matt whispered. Let's just hope it's not a piece of the continental currency, Q said. That would mean that we're still stuck in the 18th century. Maybe it's some kind of secret message that we were meant to find, Tony suggested. Like a map for time travel, Hooter added, as everyone sat huddled together, trying to see the paper. The first streaks of early morning light peeked over the horizon. Hooter? Matt called with a grin. Do you think they had potato chip bags in the 18th century? Everyone laughed with relief as Matt held up a soggy potato chip bag. As the mist slowly lifted and the golden sun rose in the east, everyone looked out across the lake to find Tony's house nestled safely in the trees, just the way it was before they had left. We're back, Matt cried, as everyone joined in the merry chorus of laughter and cheers. Look, our tent is still up, Hooter exclaimed. From the looks of the light, I'd say it's early morning, Q said, adjusting his glasses on his nose. I wonder if my parents went off the deep end worrying about us, Tony added. I'm surprised they aren't out here with divers and helicopters looking for our bodies. From all that I've read about time travel in my science fiction books, Q said, it appears that a person traveling through time can experience days, weeks, and even years, and then return home to find that he's only been gone a few hours. That's great, Matt decided. Maybe no one knows about our trip. Can you imagine what our parents would do if they found out where we were? What about Katie? Hooter whispered. Katie stared up at Matt. Matt looked down at his little sister. You know, Katie, you got yourself into some big trouble on this trip, he said sternly. And if Mom and Dad were to find out about it, they would never let you hang out with this club again. But I don't see any reason why they have to find out. Do you? Katie's red curls shook as she slowly turned her head from side to side. You won't tell, will you, Matt? She asked in a little sister voice. No, Katie, I won't tell, Matt smiled. And Q and Tony and Hooter won't tell either, will you? Matt asked. No, they all said at once. And you know, Katie, Matt continued, even though you got into a bunch of trouble, you weren't as big a pain as I thought you'd be. Katie grinned as her brother reached over and gave one of her curls a gentle yank. Matt's right, Tony said. We've all got to keep this a secret. I could just see my father's face if I told him that I spent a night with George Washington's troops. He'd probably make me go to therapy or something. Then it's settled, Matt grinned. We're all sworn to secrecy. We can hide the boat in some bushes and no one will ever have to know about it. You better not go home wearing those, Q said, pointing down to the old shoes that Mr. Hornby had given Matt. Matt nodded. I almost forgot about them. My dad is going to have a fit when he finds out that I lost my new sneakers. Just don't try and explain how you lost them, Tony laughed. Why don't you just throw those shoes in the lake, he suggested. Matt looked down at the old worn shoes and smiled on remembering Mrs. Hornby's awkward last-minute display of kindness. No, I don't think I'll ever throw them away, he said, pulling the old shoes off. We can hide them on the boat. And Katie, you better take off those socks. We'll keep them with the shoes. I don't want to, Katie frowned. You have to, Matt said firmly. We'll get into major trouble if you don't. Katie reluctantly took off the socks and handed them to Matt, who sat waiting with his hand out. He folded the socks up and placed them inside one of the old shoes that were on the floor of the boat. Land ho! Hooter cried as the boat swiftly drifted to shore. Boy, it sure is good to be back home in the 20th century, Matt sighed, looking over to a row of brown and green condominiums that stood between the trees. Suddenly, he found himself remembering his ride through the woods on Blackjack. He remembered how beautiful the woods were and how unspoiled the landscape was. I'll miss the 18th century in a way, he whispered, standing up. I know what you mean, Tony agreed, standing next to him. But if I had to be anywhere, this is right where I'd want to be. Everyone climbed out of the rowboat. Everyone except Q. He was still standing in the boat, looking down at the big gray socks that Matt had tucked into the old shoes. Q, Matt called from the shore. What's wrong? They're his socks, Q replied. Don't you think that it's kind of criminal to leave his socks out here? He asked, with a pained look on his face. Well, we can't take them with us, Matt told him. Can you imagine trying to explain them to my mother? But they were once on the feet of the father of our country. They should be treated with respect, Q pleaded. And just who was it that you had in mind to show them all this respect? Matt smiled. Me, Q cried. I could show them the utmost respect by keeping them in my own private museum in my bedroom. Wouldn't your mother want to know where they came from? Tony asked. No, she's given up trying to figure out where I get all my stuff from. My bone specimens and white mice scare my mom so much that she won't come in my room at all anymore, except to change my sheets on my bed. No one will ever suspect anything, I promise, he pleaded. It's not up to me, Matt told him, looking over at his little sister. Katie, Q wants to know if you'll let him have George Washington's socks. You can't wear them home, so you might as well just let him have them, Matt told her. Katie took a long look at the socks in Q's hand, and then she looked up into his eyes. I'll trade them, she said, giving one of her curls a twist. Sure, Q squeaked with delight. Anything you want. You can have the socks if you buy me my own bag of marshmallows, Katie demanded. You want to trade George Washington's socks for a bag of marshmallows? Q asked, his mouth dropping open in disbelief. Katie nodded, her red curls bouncing on her head in the early morning light. Everyone helped to drag the rowboat across the shore and up into the woods. They found some dense bushes that made perfect cover. When Matt was sure that the boat was safely hidden, he ordered the hike back to Tony's backyard. What's the first thing you're going to do when you get back to your house? Tony asked Hooter, who was walking in front of him. I'm going to knock on the door and ask my parents to empty the refrigerator, Hooter told him. I do it myself, but I want to save all my energy for eating, Hooter laughed. I'll just have them shovel all the food out. The first thing I'm going to do, Tony said dreamily, is go into my bathroom and soak in a nice hot tub, and when I get out, I'll have a big soft towel and clean clothes. The first thing I'm going to do when I get back home is frame George Washington's socks, Q said happily. I'll hang them in a place of reverence over my antique snakeskin collection. What about you, Matt? What's the first thing you're going to do when you get home? Hooter wanted to know. The first thing I'm going to do is read a book, Matt said with a smile. Read a book? Hooter frowned. Which book? Tony asked suspiciously. Adventures in History, Matt grinned. This was followed by a chorus of groans from Tony, Hooter, and Q. Oh, don't worry, Matt told his fellow club members. If I find anything interesting in it, I'll invite all of you for the next trip. Matt, you aren't serious, Tony asked. You can't mean that you'd really want to do this again. Not right away, Matt shook his head, but someday. Everyone groaned at this suggestion. But you have to admit, Matt whispered, that was an incredible adventure. I know I'll never forget it. I'll never forget the General's voice or Israel's face or Mr. Hornby or Blackjack or Gustav, Hooter added, the smile suddenly leaving his face. Or the Indians, Tony whispered. Or the baby ducks and the beaver, Katie piped in. Or George Washington's socks, Q sighed, holding the thick gray socks to his heart. And that's the end of that chapter.